couple of weeks ago, I was inspired to interpret Van Gogh's The Starry Night in watercolour. I just wondered how the really flat medium of watercolour could cope with all that gorgeous texture. The plan I came up with was to use a really textured surface, and this is actually wallpaper that I have stuck to my painting panel and then painted with watercolour on it. I was so happy with how my Starry Night turned out that I thought I would have a go at interpreting Van Gogh's Almond Blossom painting. I've loved this painting. He painted it to celebrate the birth of his nephew Theo, and it was one of the favourite paintings in the Van Gogh family. My version is inspired by the apple tree that sits just outside, or grows just outside, my studio. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I share a tip, trick or technique that I wish I'd known about ages ago. This week it's all about how to paint on a very textured surface to bring a new dimension to your watercolour painting. Preparing the textured surface is really easy. You first of all just got to find a textured paper that meets your needs, and you can get all these little samples from a DIY shop. They say help yourself, so I took them literally and I did. This is the one I've selected. It's quite an overall texture and it's not too deep because I want to actually get some delicate blossom on this. So having anything too regular or too deep would be very disruptive. And I really like these. I'm into painting on circles at the moment. The surface is birch, which has a very smooth grain, and then there is an MDF sort of frame to stop it warping. You can paint the sides so it doesn't need framing. Getting a circular frame can be a bit of a challenge. I just use PVA glue. You want something that is not washable, because children's washable PVA glue will just, well, it is washable, it's water soluble, so that wouldn't be any good when you add your watercolours. It's best to look for something that's acid free, thinking about the longevity of your piece, even if it's just a bit of fun. Now, if your glue is a bit thick, that doesn't look too bad, but if it's looking a little gluppy, add a little bit of water just to help it flow and give that a good mix round. So you want this to be like a single cream, nothing too thick, but not watery. And then of course you need to apply it. Be generous, it's going to soak into that wood. You can do this on a canvas as well, but because of the spring in the canvas, it does make getting really good adhesion quite tricky. Pay special attention to edges, and if you're doing a square one, pay special attention to corners. I've cut this very roughly to shape, and then we simply place and smooth it down in one direction to get rid of any air bubbles. You've got a brayer, a roller like that. Again, you can just really make sure things are stuck down, then flip it over and weight it down. A very good use for your big gorgeous art books. And we need that to dry, and how long that's going to take is entirely dependent on the warmth of the place you're working in and the atmosphere. Don't forget to wash your brush up, and we'll come back in a moment. Once this is dry, just take the weight off, obviously. Protect your surface. If you've got a big cutting board, that would be great. And then use a really sharp knife. If you've got one of these knives, do break off the end so you're using a fresh blade. I find this easier if I stand up. And then trim round the edge. I personally think it is better to do that in multiple cuts rather than just in one cut, unless you know, if your blade is super sharp, it may go through in one. All depends how thick your paper is. I like to angle it in slightly because we don't want any overhang. The other thing to be careful about is just that you don't catch the edge of your board. Right, there we go. Now we need to check edges, and I noticed that edge has come off. So if you've got any edges lifting, just apply a little bit of glue. If it sort of squeezes out on the edge, just wipe as well. Once your paper is dry, it's just a case of applying 3 thin layers of watercolour ground evenly across the surface. A roller actually is the best way of doing this, but it does gobble up quite a lot of your watercolour ground. It gets absorbed into the sponge roller. So if you're just doing one, then probably a brush is a better bet. And of course, don't forget your edges. Each layer needs to be touch dry before you do the next one, and then allow, say, 24 hours for the whole thing to dry and cure before you paint on top of it. That's my prepared board, and I'm going to be inspired by Van Gogh's wonderful Almond Blossom that he painted for his nephew Theo, but I'm going to turn it into Apple Blossom because out of my studio window I can see our apple tree. As mine's a circular canvas, I need to adapt this, and also my canvas is way smaller than Van Gogh's painting. I've seen this in Amsterdam. Just really like the branches and how gnarly they are, and that's very true to life. And I believe that he was inspired by Japanese prints, which were very fashionable at the time, and this composition is very Japanese in its sort of aesthetic. I'm doing my little sketch with a green watercolour pencil so that it will dissolve away as I paint and not leave any marks. Don't want this to be too complicated because of the size of the canvas. And I'm just going to roughly indicate where the blossoms are going to go. Now, colour-wise, I've had a little think and had a few swatches. I think this would be a good opportunity to use colours I don't use very often. This is Cobalt Turquoise, and that's ordinary Phthalo Turquoise. I use Phthalo a lot, but not Cobalt, and I think that might be quite fun. That's Perylene Green, which is a really beautiful dark green. That is Cobalt Green. So I think those will be great. This is Potter's Pink, which might be fun in the flowers. And this is Rhodonite. Now, Rhodonite is one of the Primatech paints from Daniel Smith's. I haven't used these since I swatched them out, and I was quite rude about them. Well, I wasn't rude about the colours. I was very rude about their marketing. So I thought maybe I'll try that because I was thinking of this Permanent Rose. Actually, I think this may bring a bit more to the party, and that would be fun. I've got a manganese, is it a manganese brown? Magnesium brown, sorry, magnesium brown. Yeah, I'm going to start with the background and paint round my branches and maybe around the flowers, but then lift the flowers out. Let's add water. I think far harder to paint this in watercolour than it would be in oils, because we've got all those complicated white blossoms that we're going to have to retain. Whereas, of course, in oils, you can just shove it all over the top. Let's start mixing colours in. That's a bit of phthalo blue. That's a little bit of Prussian blue I'm just going to mix in. It's a little bit of phthalo turquoise. We can just lift our board to get a bit of direction on it if we want to. A little bit of flow. I think on the edges I would just extend the colour around the edges. So like that, mixing it wet and wet. If you look at the original, that there are so many brush strokes and it's so many layers in this background, and I want to get that sort of depth, I think. Working on watercolour ground, which is obviously what we've got here, you'll find that watercolour ground lifts, or the watercolour on the ground lifts very easily, and that makes layering and glazing a tricky old thing. So the more you can get things right first time, the happier you will be. Just dropping in those colours in the background, wet in wet, seeing what we can do. Now, what is going to be important, let's grab a bit of kitchen towel, is to soften off edges around where the blossoms are going to go. I don't want any hard edges. So I'm using the kitchen towel, and if it's already starting to dry, I'm going to just add a little water. The good thing about watercolour ground is that it does sit on the surface, so it's very easy to lift off. I want this blossom to be super delicate, though I have to say on Van Gogh's painting a lot of it is quite outlined. So what I want to do is get a mixture of hard and soft edges, the hard edges of the branches and soft, sort of more fluffy edges of the blossoms. Why don't we have a go at these flowers? And I'm not sure, to be honest, how this is going to work. So I have put in a little dot of the rhodonite, and then with my wet brush I am going to touch and let it run through the water to form the petals. This may be too pink. No, I think that's okay. And I'm just going to do that over and over again. Wet brush, wiggle towards it and let it have a little walk through that wet. Do 5 little blobs because Apple Blossom has 5 petals. I wasn't sure how this would work on this rough surface as a method of doing flowers. Works well on a smooth surface, but I think that looks blossomy. Once it's dry, put in a little bit, it's obviously wet, of the yellow sort of stamen and things, and I may put in a little bit or a few edges, just as Van Gogh has. What I could do is grab a little bit of the potter's pink and I could just let that wiggle through some of this. To give a bit of variation. I just thought doing the flowers first rather than the branches would give us more opportunities to get soft edges onto the petals. Pink and the turquoise do zing off each other, don't they? I want some of the petals to overlap and merge because of course you're not seeing every flower straight on. Some are from the sides. Some no doubt have been zapped by the wind and the rain. I'm deliberately, because I am right-handed, I've deliberately started to the left just to avoid smudging any of this. As they start to dry, if you want to strengthen the centres, you can go back in with a little more concentrated paint. Okay, last little bunch down here. Let's do one on its side. What I'm going to do is grab a little bit of my cobalt green. Just look at some of the petal shapes that Van Gogh had sort of outlined. Also, I'm looking at my tree out of the window, trying to see what shapes I can see. While the petals are drying, I might just start, because I'm excited, on the branches down here. So I've mixed a bit of my cobalt green and my perylene green. And I'm going to sort of do my underlayer. He's done strokes all the way around the branches. So I'm going to emulate that to give a bit of form to them. I'm doing an underlayer of the green because he's painted them as sort of greeny grey. So let's bring in some turquoise like that. Some more definite strokes, but I'll do some dark ones just to mix in wet in wet like that. So see round the knots in the wood, it's really directional like this. Where the texture underneath is showing through the branch, it's quite nice. I wonder what Van Gogh would make of the fact, the adoration and the esteem that he's held in now. He notoriously never sold paintings while he was alive, and it was actually his sister-in-law, so his brother Theo, who he absolutely adored and who adored him, the only member of his family to really support him. It was his sister-in-law that decided to build his reputation, or do everything in her power to build his reputation. I wonder whether he'd be amused at seeing all his creations on tea towels or whatever. More drawing with the paint now rather than painting with it. That seems to suit the sort of marks. just putting some stronger marks in. And this is damp, so they are merging a little, but because it's so strong, it's not moving too much. That's about dry, so let's have a look. Just before we go on, I do want to soften some edges, and it's not a bad thing to show you how easy it is to lift colour on this surface. Look at that. I'm just using a short flat brush. It's damp, give it a bit of a wiggle, and we can soften those edges rather beautifully. In fact, it's so nice to soften the edges that you kind of have to make sure you don't get too carried away. Even staining colours, which are usually very hard to lift, come off pretty easily. We need to put the little centres in, because if we look at the almond blossoms here, they've got little centres, and we need to think about the outlining, because again, if you look here, it is quite a lot of outlining, and I'm wondering, because they are sort of yellowy brown, I've got that very yellow magnesium brown, and it's very opaque. So if I use a thick brush, very thick mixture, is it enough? The other alternative might be to use a far brighter yellow. This is Queen Gold. Or maybe, of course, a mixture of the both. And I'm trying to avoid going to a tiny brush. Look, what's that, a 12? Comes to a good point. Doesn't need to be any bigger, smaller than that. A few dots, a few lines. This is pretty much neat. It's called olive green. It's quite like a sap green. Problem with this watercolour is that you can't get the depth and complexity of the marks that the oil paint gives. I mean, it is a different medium, no surprise there. Maybe just a few would be kind of cool. Right, let's grab a little of our Perylene green and look at some of our outlining. They're sort of almost zigzaggy in places. We can use it to extend branches if we need to. And the big question is, are we going to outline any of the flowers? Use some of my Potter's pink, almost neat, couldn't I? So if you've got the blossom all sort of being a bit lost edged and the tree being all a bit hard edged, I think it's a bit out of kilter. I know we're trying to sort of copy Van Gogh, but we also want our painting to work. I want to give the impression that there are more flowers than we painted. Dipping this watercolour pencil, it was the sort of olivey green one, just in water so that I get more of a interesting mark. Just dipping it in the water sort of dissolves the lead and gives you a more painterly mark rather than a more pencily mark. And here is my finished painting in the style of Van Gogh, but mine is apple blossom rather than the almond blossom. All that needs to be done now is to think how to protect it, because watercolour on watercolour ground lifts so easily. One accidental splosh and it'll be gone. We've got the option of using a varnish, a spray varnish. If you use a matte varnish, something like this, and I do like Gogh varnish simply because it's a very low solvent varnish, but if you use something like that, it'll look very watercoloury. You can of course get varnishes that also have UV protection, which could be a good thing. This one doesn't. The other alternative is to use a wax medium. The smart fine art wax medium is something called Dorland's wax. Absolutely beautiful, but really rather pricey in the UK. So I tend to use a wax that's designed to go over chalk paint, either something like French Chic or the Annie Sloan wax is really nice. You're looking for a transparent wax that will not yellow with time. And you can see it's sort of a paste. This doesn't have an odour, which is really nice. And all you do is very gently rub it into the surface. Doesn't smear your watercolour because your watercolour is water soluble and there is no water in that wax. We'll do that all the way over. Sorry about the state of my hands, I've been gardening, it's gorgeous. We'll let that dry, given quite how warm it is, and as long as you do a thin layer, I reckon that'll only take an hour, hour and a half. Once it is dry, you can take a lint-free cloth like this and give it a really good burnish so that you get a sheen. It's not going to be a shine, it's going to be a sheen, and it enriches the colours and just gives a lovely, rich, almost leathery look to the work. So that's how I'm going to do it. You could spray with varnish first, then put wax on top, but you cannot put anything on the top of wax, so make sure it is finished. You might want to put 2 coats on just in case you miss one first time round, in which case put the coat on, let it dry, put another one, let it dry, then buff it. So I hope you really enjoyed seeing Van Gogh's masterpiece interpreted in watercolour. I'm really pleased with this. If I did it again, I might choose a paper that had a little more texture, because I'm loving where the texture is showing through, and maybe a little more of that could be quite fun. But I'm not going to be overly critical. I think that is a little bit of fun, and I'm going to certainly look for other opportunities to work on textured paper with my watercolour and bring that extra dimension to my work.